Second edition of the College Football Playoff Rankings is out. You've got yourselves a new top 10. Georgia, Alabama stay in the top 2 spots, but Oregon moves up to number 3. Ohio State moves up to number 4, each moving up 1 slot after Michigan State lost its first game of the season over the weekend to Purdue. Somewhat surprisingly, despite the win, Cincinnati does indeed move up to the 5th spot at 9-0. And why I say it's surprising, just hanging on by the skin of its teeth. The Cincinnati beating Tulsa. A lot of people thought they'd be penalized, but instead the win is the win is the win, and Cincinnati's up in the 5th spot. Back now with Chip Patterson and Dennis Dodd to break down the newest incarnation of these rankings here. And let's start with these top 4 teams. I don't think there's any big surprises there, but Chip, do you agree with the top 4 the way it is right now?
My understanding of the way the selection committee is going about this, there was a debate potentially for the number 2 spot between Alabama and Oregon. They had the exact same record, 8-1. Their strength of record rating is about the same. Their strength of schedule rating is about the same. So it really is a matter of preference. And I do think Oregon's going to win that tiebreak because a win at Ohio State is the better win than anything Alabama can show up with to the table and to the debate. So I understand exactly why we're going to be sorting it out like that, at least at this point, based on everything that's happened. So I'm going to say no surprise with the top 4. It is what I projected, and so there's going to be more debate to come as there's more data points on the slate for all of these teams in the top 4. But right now, no surprises.
No, this is exactly how I had the top 4, so I'm not surprised. I was a little bit surprised outside the top 4. Now we got Michigan ahead of Michigan State. And we're at that point in the season where the head-to-head is going to matter less. It's going to be the broad body of work. And frankly, Michigan's broad body of work is better than Michigan State's. Now, I know Michigan State doesn't want to hear that, but when you go on the road and get worked by Purdue, Purdue is ranked this week. We know that. They're 6-3. They're the upset kings of college football. But Michigan's had a more consistent and better season, even though they went to East Lansing and lost by 4 to Michigan State. I know that doesn't make much sense to a lot of people, but that's the way it's going to be. And as long as Oregon and Ohio State are in the top 4, we're not going to go crazy like we did last week about, well, what about the head-to-head? Who's in and who's out? They're both safely in. If Oregon wins the rest of their games, I think they're sitting pretty. And obviously, I just said it, Ohio State's the best chance for the Big Ten to get in. So not much surprise at all in the top 4.
So, Dennis, we'll talk more about Michigan and Michigan State in just a second, but there is a definite level of surprise with where Cincinnati is right now, moving up to number 5. Given the way that the committee has talked and ranked teams, you would assume that the struggles that we've seen with Cincinnati, even though the team is 9-0, that the win wouldn't necessarily be the be-all, end-all, but it seems that it was this week, even though they just barely beat Tulsa.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I'll tell you why. Because, I was outraged last week at number 6. Michigan State loses. You got to drop them below Cincinnati. Michigan and Michigan State have had 1 loss. And I said, as it gets later in the season, the broad body of work comes into play. I mean, we've seen it before late in the season from this committee. And for them to move up to number 5, there's only 4 undefeated teams left in the entire country. I think you've got to reward them for that. I just talked about how bad they looked against Tulsa. But I think you've got to reward them for that right now. But you can see what's happening here. It's a setup. They're like a placeholder right now. I told you what had to happen for them to get into the top 4. It looked pretty good at top 5 right now, but I said 2 or 3 of these conferences Power 5 conferences each have to come up with 2 lost conference champions for Cincinnati to have a chance, because Georgia, even if it loses another game, I think is going to get in. It would help if Georgia beat Alabama to eliminate the possibility of the SEC having to, but that would mean still the 2 Power 5 conferences would have to have 2 2-loss champions, because I think a 1-loss Power 5 champion in general still gets in against Cincinnati.
Cincinnati cannot control its own future. You win out, you try to be the 13-0 conference champion. But in terms of its ranking at number 5, I'm not surprised because Notre Dame is one of the best wins that you have. This selection committee considers Notre Dame the 9th best team in the country, and Cincinnati went to South Bend on the road and beat the 9th best team in the country. So while Cincinnati's strength of schedule rating, which is outside of the top 100, is the reason why it is not higher up in the rankings, it is also within that schedule that one win against Notre Dame that allows it to continue to move up, even though it was not impressive against Tulsa. And still another metric that we know the committee uses, strength of record. Cincinnati is number 4 in the country in that. So it's a very disjointed profile. 9-0 on the actual wins and losses, number 4 in strength of record, number 102 in strength of schedule. But again, it's that number 9, as in the ranking of Notre Dame, that is able to continue to help Cincinnati. I'll tell you what, no one is a bigger Notre Dame fan than Luke Fickell and the Bearcats, because as long as the Fighting Irish continue to win, it makes the Bearcats' playoff profile even better.
So Cincinnati moves up 1 spot to number 5. Michigan moves up 1 spot to number 6. We heard Dennis talk a little bit about his thoughts on Michigan, Michigan State. What are your thoughts, Chip, on where Michigan landed in this ranking?
I would have liked to see Michigan State have the head-to-head advantage. And if I was to choose these two teams, I think that the Spartans are a little bit more dynamic with their ability not just to run the ball with Kenneth Walker, but move it through the air with Peyton Thorne and Jalen Naylor. But Dennis mentioned something earlier that I think is very significant, which is the pass defense that was exposed against David Bell. Well, that was also exposed against Michigan. In fact, Michigan had one of its best passing days against the Spartans defense. It is a very much a fatal flaw for this Spartans team. And as we continue to look ahead and think about going up against CJ Stroud and all those awesome Buckeyes wide receivers, it doesn't forecast well. But all those things to me are off of the profile. So I would have liked to see Michigan State check in 1 spot ahead of Michigan. But the win against Michigan, no matter what, in terms of quality, like forget the head-to-head, the fact that that is a win against a team that the selection committee considers a top 6 team is the thing that's going to help the Spartans remain high in the rankings. So, you know, Michigan now has some great opportunities ahead. It just needs to continue to win, and that includes not only beating Penn State in a tough environment in Happy Valley, but being able to get it done at the end of the season at home in the Big House against the Buckeyes. A lot to be seen if Jim Harbaugh and this group can get it done. Again, I would have liked to see the Spartans ahead of the Wolverines, but I had them in the exact same 2 positions, just flip-flopped. So no big argument for me on either Big Blue or Sparty.
Yeah, no big argument for me, but here's something the selection committee will never admit, even if they're not consciously thinking about it. There was a bit of news this week that was very interesting, and Jim Harbaugh mentioned it on Monday, I think, and yesterday, where the Big Ten admitted to him that the Peyton Thorne reviewed fumble, I think inside the 5-yard line in that game 10 days ago, was actually a fumble. Upon review, they said he was down, and he fumbled into the end zone. I think Aiden Hutchinson recovered it for a touchdown. Well, if that play stands, and it should have stood, according to the Big Ten and according to Jim Harbaugh, Michigan wins the game. We're not sitting here talking about why is J.J. McCarthy in the game? Why did he fumble? Why was he allowed to make that play? I think Michigan right now, and I'll say it again, I think they might be the 2nd best team in the Big Ten. And I think that's what the committee is thinking right now. They don't have to justify it because they never do. We saw that last week with Oregon and Oregon State. And sooner or later, Ohio State, if they keep winning, is going to pass Oregon. We know that. So I think that was in the back of their minds too. Yeah, it was a loss, but Michigan accounted for itself pretty well.
Oklahoma stays put at number 8. They had the bye this week. I think there are people that thought maybe they should move up a spot or 2. Undefeated right now. The knock has been that this is a team that just hasn't played anybody to this point. That changes the last few weeks of the season. It starts against number 13 Baylor this weekend. If Oklahoma does win out, Dennis, do they control their fate? Are they in the college football playoff if they win out?
Yeah, I just laid it out in the previous segment. Yeah, there's no complaining about Oklahoma right now because they control their own destiny virtually, because as I pointed out, no Power 5 undefeated champion has ever been left out. And so they play their three toughest games, or three grouping of toughest games at the end of the season, Baylor, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State. Win those undefeated. They're going to play one of those teams again, maybe ranked in the conference championship game, win again, and you finish out 13-0, you're going to be in. I don't care who else is in. You'd have to have 5 undefeated Power 5 champions right now for that even to be an issue, and we already know that's not going to be the case. So they would be in. They control their own destiny. They're kind of like Georgia right now, in that Georgia can lose a game, I think it'd still be in. Oklahoma can't. But if they don't get it done, they don't get it done. So it doesn't matter if they're ranked 8th, 7th, 2nd, or whatever. It's right in front of them.
I totally agree, and I'll add one thing onto this. The selection committee, if it has to sweat, if it has to break any ties, Caleb Williams is one of the most impactful individual players in all of college football in terms of what he means to this Oklahoma offense and how different it looks with him at the helm. And about half the season, by the end of the season, is going to be Caleb Williams, and the other half is Spencer Rattler. And if he is able to continue to be as impactful and as effective as he's been in the last couple of games, then I think the selection committee would easily be able to lean on that. Again, I have no doubts that a 13-0 Oklahoma team, conference champion, is going to be in the college football playoff. But if you have to make an argument between 13-0 Oklahoma and let's say 13-0 Cincinnati, well, the selection committee, which may want to put the Sooners in anyway, can now justify it by looking at the change at the quarterback position.
So, guys, I know we have a few more weeks left before this is all finalized, but give us your crystal ball. Look ahead, Chip. When this is all said and done, who are going to be the top 4 teams?
All right, I'm going with Georgia at 1. Give me Ohio State at 2. I think I've got Oklahoma at 3, and let's go Oregon at the number 4 spot. My colleague Tom Fornelli has been on the Ducks since July. Said he had a special feeling about them, and I think the way they've overcome all the injuries early in the season is going to be able to help them close it down the stretch. So no double ups in the Big Ten, no double ups in the SEC. We just got the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 all represented.
Yeah, I've got Georgia number 1. That's easy. I just told you what Oklahoma has to do. I've got them number 2. I do think they're going to win out. I do think they're peaking. I do think they're a stronger team with Caleb Williams. And they're going to look a lot like the 2017 team that had to outscore everybody to get to the playoff. And I keep saying this, really blew it. A 17-point lead shortly before halftime against Georgia in the Rose Bowl, and they lose that game in overtime. I think that's at least going to be in the back of the mind of Lincoln Riley if he gets that far. And I've got Michigan number 3. I told you how highly I think of Michigan right now. I think they absolutely have the firepower and the defense to, at home, beat Ohio State and a young, still growing C.J. Stroud and bottle up Travion Henderson and overcome that defense now that has a defensive touchdown in 6 straight games. And then I've got Oregon number 4. I'm really high on Oregon right now. I think they've reached that point where they see the finish line. Joe Moorhead is having a Broyles Award type season as the top assistant coach in the country. He missed that game against Stanford. That's the only game they lost. I'm talking about the offensive coordinator of the Ducks. He's done miracles with Anthony Brown, who is limited as a quarterback, but he's tried to limit his turnovers. He had those 2 critical interceptions against UCLA, but I think he's done a hell of a job for a guy who was really just a guy at Boston College, and now he may be a Pac-12 quarterback. I do think they win the rest of them, and they get into the top 4. So Georgia, Oklahoma, Michigan, Oregon.
So Dennis and Chip agree. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, all in. Dennis has Michigan, and Chip has Oklahoma. Fellas, thanks so much for breaking it all down after the second edition of the College Football Playoff Rankings. Now, for more from Chip Patterson, be sure to tune into the Cover 3 podcast every week after the College Football Playoff Rankings are released. An emergency episode, so be on the lookout for that.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.